This is Pixelated Audio, and you're listening to Expansion Pack 20.
Welcome back to the bi-weekly video game music and retro gaming podcast, Pixelated Audio. I'm your host, James, and this is Brian.
How's it going, guys? Thanks for listening to our last show, our live MAGWest show. We're kind of riding on the heels of that a little bit, and Today's topic is, well, we're doing an expansion pack, and today's topic is the Sega Genesis again.
Right.
The reason why is because in our live show, we didn't really get to talk about the music, really so much focus on the composers and stuff, so we kind of wanted to re-look at the Sega Genesis, one more time. And we're joined today with our good friend Gene.
Hey, how's it going? Good to be back.
Yeah, welcome back. He was with us on our last expansion pack, actually.
Right. Yeah. And he's very well involved in MAGWest and stuff like that. So since we're kind of carrying on from that last episode, and we're going to get to listen to a little bit more music, a little bit more in depth, we thought it'd be great to have Gene back to really dive into some more Sega Genesis.
Right. So today we're talking about the Sega Genesis. There's no real theme other than that. We've picked tracks. I've got 4, James got 4, and Gene has got 4. And we're going to kind of rotate through them.
Yeah, just regular expansion pack style and see what pops up. Hopefully this time we don't have any overlap like the last expansion pack with Gene.
Watch, there's going to be like 4 tracks. You guys are going to have every track overlap. And then one of mine will get like a James pick or something. So that track we came in with, tell us about that. That was your pick, Gene.
So I think there's nothing obscure about Shining Force 2. It's a strategy RPG. It was one of the sort of flagship games of the original Shining Force, and the sequel kind of improves on it. It's a little bit less crazy in terms of difficulty spikes, but it's a great game. You have, a party of 12 characters. You have battles that are scripted, sort of like Final Fantasy Tactics, and in between you run around in between towns, grab items, you can promote your characters to different classes. It's a pretty standard strategy RPG, maybe a little bit easier than your typical one, but I just love this tune. I mean...
Did you play any of the Shining Force games?
Oh yeah, I played the hell out of 1 and 2, like all the time.
Nice. I played 1 and then I played most of 2 and I just never got through. Have you played them?
No, I've never actually played any of the Shining Force, but I have listened to quite a bit of the Shining Force music. They all have great soundtracks.
Nice. Yeah, I was actually looking over here because we're recording in our new kind of studio area, right? And I just moved. And so I was looking and I was trying to see if I had Shining Force 2 actually out yet, but I haven't done my Sega Genesis stuff. So why'd you pick this track?
So I think for a few reasons. Number one, you guys got on me a little bit for picking mostly somber tunes the last time, so I wanted to pick something that was about as happy as you could possibly get. But beyond that, it's just everything that you want to hear in a Genesis tune. I mean, and there's a lot of associations with, it sounds like crap, but really... It's great composition, great sound design. There's well-chosen sounds. I really think the arrangement is great. There's lots of various different movements to the piece. It loops really nicely in the game, and you can listen to it for hours, and I probably have, and you never get tired of it.
Yeah, it's a very theatrical track. I was actually, it took me a second. I almost forgot I was listening to some Sega Genesis because it wasn't so like raw and crunchy. It was very bright and smooth. And I mean, it was like obscenely happy.
Yeah.
It was like so happy. It was perverse. So I think you looped back around and now you got another weird track. But
You're overcompensating. This track, I don't think you said the name of it, right?
No, this is Lively Town.
Yeah, and that totally fits. Right?
Yeah, it plays right in the very beginning of the game. You get introduced to your heroes. They're all like teenage characters. They get out of class. You know, your character, I think, wakes up from sleeping or whatever in the middle of class.
Always have to wake up in an RPG.
Of course, yeah. I don't know. Should we talk about the composer a little bit? Or
Please.
Yeah, so Motoaki Takenouchi wrote the music for Shining Force 1, 2, CD, the Gaiden games, which are loosely based on Shining Force, Shining Wisdom, and Jewel Master, Landstalker. Just if you he has this sort of sound. You've probably heard one of the soundtracks. You kind of know what I'm talking about. Very orchestral, a lot of horns, but very sort of a little bit brought back from the mix, not like super blaring.
This track specifically, to me, I think that it does have that ragtime happiness to it, but it's not just overly simplified either. It's very complex, and there's a lot of diversity even in something that's kind of silly and a little bit maybe something that doesn't take itself too seriously. There's a lot of serious business going on with the track. You know, it does have some soul to it, some kind of live, you know, the track's called Lively Town, but it has some kind of really live feeling to it, you know, something that's moving and breathing.
Oh yeah, and I mean, just because it sounds, you know, so bright that you're dopey, like, doesn't mean that it was designed by someone that's like that. I mean, this was very well put together. I think that it very well matches with a town. It really sounds like a town that would be in the beginning of a game. You know, you haven't had the hardships yet, you haven't lost anybody, you know, you haven't really faced any battles, so everything is just so glowingly bright. And you know, I'm sure it doesn't stay like that, but this track I think was a great choice to actually start the episode too.
And also, this uses a driver that was done by Noriyuki Iwadare and his team at Cube. So you will see that throughout the you know, the Shining Force series on the Genesis anyway. They continue to use that Cube driver, so it does have a little more characteristics than maybe something else, and it does have its kind of fortes. And I think if we do some comparison, we could probably pick them out, but it's kind of hard to just, you know, come up with it off the top of your head. But.
Well, maybe we'll have to do a Shining Force episode, and then
oh my god, I would love that.
Yeah,
I
mean, it would just be hard to kind of divide it up, and how are we going to conquer, you know, that series?
We might have to do like a special, like, you know, just Shining Force 2 or something.
Yeah.
You know? Anyways, so let's move on. Do you have anything else?
Yeah, I was going to say, as a last little note, what's sort of interesting is compared to a lot of Genesis tracks, there's no percussion in this one. It's all just orchestral sounds. There's some really interesting tricks that make it sound very live. It was clearly pre-composed because you have just purely compositional arrangement techniques going on with the way the horns come in and out. And there's those trills at the very end that kind of speed up a little bit, and creating things that sound a little bit out of just like 16ths and 30 seconds can be kind of tricky. So definitely some really strong composition chops in this.
Yeah, you know, when you said there's no percussion, I was like, I had to think a bit about it for a minute. I was like, you know, you're right. There wasn't any. I kind of threw me for a loop too.
Yeah, it's just like a string section and a brass, essentially.
Right.
Well, and I think that alone gave it that very theatrical feel, like someone's dancing around. Everything's kind of in the higher range, and so everything just feels very kind of floaty and bright.
Yeah. All right, so how are we going to do this? Who's next?
I remember last time we had quite a bit of trouble keeping track, so I think we should just go clockwise, and I think you should be next, Brian.
I should be next? Okay, well then we are going to move on to another kind of RPG, tactical RPG. The track is called Thought of the Holy, which is the player phase 3 from the game Warsong, also known as Langrazor. All right, welcome back. That was Thought of the Holy, Player Phase 3 from Warsong, also known as Langrisser, on the Sega Genesis, released in 1991. And this was developed by a division of NCS called Careersoft, and was published by Masaya in Japan.
Yeah, this is a very cool track. I mean, it's really heavy. It's very heroic in driving. There's some really cool stuff going on with the stereo panning with the drums and stuff. I was like, wow, that was really cool. Like, it really trips you out, and I always like that. But yeah, this is a cool track. Awesome guitar solos and stuff. It was really cool.
Right, that flutter at the end is just so cool, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's just starts going wild, and then this song abruptly starts repeating, goes through the loop. But yeah, it was awesome. It came on during my just random rotation, and I was like, oh man, I gotta play this. So
yeah, it's aggressive but high energy, and really you get pumped listening to this track. This is the first time I'd heard this one before.
Cool.
And to echo, I really love the stereo tricks, but I just love that that slap bass.
The bass was really good. Yeah, it's something that kind of disappears in the background because the melody is so strong in certain sections. But when you kind of hone in on it, it's really cool. It's kind of starts walking around, and then it has the slap parts to it, and it gets really funky. I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Yeah. So the track was composed by Cube. So kind of making a circle back to Gene's last pick. This was composed by Hiroshi Fujioka, which is actually uncredited, Noriyuki Iwadare, also uncredited, and Isao Mizoguchi, uncredited as well. They just went by Cube in the credits. So it's kind of, I'm not sure, but I think this track is a Noriyuki Iwadare track. I'm pretty sure that's what it is. I was kind of looking around different Japanese sites, and it does have him listed, but it's this is not confirmed or something.
Right.
Assuming that's it. Anyways, yeah, I loved the track, so I had to go in. And this is also using the same driver as the Shining Force 2 track. Mm-hmm. So again, we get to kind of hear this Cube and Dogen's Shibuya driver in actual practice. So that's cool. And we're going to be hearing it probably, I'm sure we're hearing it again. It's used in a lot of other games. It was also used in Granada.
Okay.
So we did a full episode on that, used the same driver. Crusader of Senti, Lord Monarch, Shining Force, all the games in Shining Force. Ease 3, and I believe Zero Wing as well. All known for good soundtracks, right? So, yeah. Warsong is I knew it actually as Langrisser, even though it came here in the States as Warsong. It's a turn-based strategy RPG developed by Careersoft, and it's the first in the Langrisser series, and it's the only game that was released outside of Japan. For whatever reason. And when it came to the States, it was published by a small company called Treco, and they changed the name to Warsong to make it a little bit easier for maybe Langrisser was you see that on the shelves, you're like, what is this?
Yeah, I don't even know how to say that.
Yeah, but the game, I really like the series. I actually have played it quite a few times. It's been probably about 10 to 15 years since I played it last, but I did look up some screenshots, and I was like, oh my god, I remember. Anyways, it's very similar to Fire Emblem. So if you're familiar with the Fire Emblem series, it's very much like that. You can control this squad of heroes, and you have to each kind of phase or each level is there's a new task. So rescue this person, or conquer this area, or take out this base, stuff like that. It's just a fun game on the Genesis. If you were a Genesis kid and you never got a Fire Emblem game, which you didn't, then this was your next best thing.
Yep. Unfortunately, I was a Genesis kid, but didn't have any RPGs. So
yeah. What did you have? Monaco GP or something only? Or?
No, I had Boogerman and Earthworm Jim. And,
okay.
And Toe Jam and Earl, things like that.
Oh, okay.
Wasn't really into RPGs yet.
Anyways, so the game's fun. Track is really cool. The whole soundtrack is really good.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's a powerhouse team. So I would assume the music for anything that Cube is doing is just insane.
Yeah, their name popped up a bunch when I was looking for things. Not just drivers, but some of the composers. Iwadare, I was looking at stuff briefly from a few things, and his name popped up.
And I think why his name pops up a lot in credits is because of this driver. I don't necessarily think that he has composed that many things for the Genesis. I mean, he most certainly he has, but I think because of the driver, his name shows up in sound design a lot.
Yeah.
Right.
So that might be a reason. So you guys ready to move on?
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. So my first track is from X-Men 2 Clone Wars, and the track is called Climbing the Temple. You just heard Climbing the Temple from X-Men 2 Clone Wars on the Sega Genesis, developed by Head Games and published by Sega, composed by Kurt Harland.
Man, I thought I knew this soundtrack pretty well, and I hear this, I'm like, wow, this is so cool. This is rad.
Yeah, it's
really
like
cool.
it's a very big departure from Gene's first track. I mean, it's like the polar opposite. I mean, this is all bass, and it's like straight out of Stomp or something. I mean, it's crazy.
The drums, so huge. Like, this is a massive track.
Yeah, very zippy bass, and then you get the stereo panning, right? That just kind of like just grinds in your left and then right, then left and right, and it kind of does this little echo thing. It kind of plays head games with you. I thought it was awesome.
Oh yeah, there was a lot of really cool stereo panning and stuff. And for me, since I knew this was an X-Men game, it just reminded me of like Sentinels, like stomping around and being on a big battlefield. And I never actually played this game. I played the first X-Men game on the Genesis and was not a big fan of it. I loved X-Men, and then so when this one came out, I was like, I think I can pass. Unfortunately, it seems like this was a very good game.
Yeah,
I've been told.
I like this game a lot. I thought it was pretty good. I think you start out in like a boat.
You start off in a snowy sort of wasteland on this one. Yeah,
okay.
You get a random character every time you play until you get to the very start of the first level.
That's right. I thought it was on a boat and it was raining, but I guess that was snow.
Yeah. It's just like it's really weird, actually. You get this cold open. You literally turn on the game and it's like, what the? I'm just like moving around.
It was hard too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely going to have to go back and play this one. I mean, I grew up, I was big into X-Men and comics in general, so I was really excited as a Genesis kid getting the first X-Men game. I was like, oh man, this is going to be so awesome. And unfortunately, I wasn't a fan, and it kept me from buying this game. But I'm going to have to, now that I'm older, go back and try this one out.
Yeah,
but,
now I got to listen through the whole soundtrack because I thought I knew it pretty well, but I guess I didn't because I just must have forgotten or something. I don't know.
I think this is the track when you're fighting Magneto right around the halfway point. He actually joins you after you beat him, which is cool. You get to start playing as Magneto
That's
at
awesome.
that point.
Wow, good memory.
Yeah.
I mean, I played the game.
I
thought it was on a boat.
Actually, so I didn't get to say this before, but I didn't grow up with a Genesis, but my cousin had one, and I was over at his house all the time in the summers in the 90s, so it was like Shining Force, X-Men, Streets of Rage, of course, and just all of these games. And so, this was back before anybody knew. Game FAQs was just starting out, so we actually printed out FAQs for a few games, like straight up on a printer, because it would.
I remember doing that.
Oh yeah, it would take minutes to load these things. This was like 94, 95. And we discovered this weird glitch in this game where, like, if you play as Nightcrawler, and you can kind of like freeze in place, so like everything just passes through you. So one character takes a whole bunch of a beating, and then the other character can take over whenever. I don't know how we figured that out, but we kind of just abused the hell out of it in the last levels because they're really hard.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
awesome.
Back in the day, Genesis games, a lot of them were not very easy. Especially a lot of these beat 'em up style games were just. They were like nearly impossible. Just get a little bit further, each time you play, and then hopefully you can eventually get to the end someday. But
yeah, I think every Genesis game that we've covered on the show, as far as an episode, they've all been pretty hard, pretty like impossible.
Yeah.
Games. Well, Elisa Dragoon wasn't that bad, but it did get.
Yeah, and Restar wasn't too bad after playing it for a little while. But for this game, I was looking into the composer a little bit, Kurt Harland, and found out that he is best known as the lead singer of a band called Information Society. I'd never heard of the band, but apparently
my favorite band.
But apparently they were huge. Like VH1 did this whole like thing on them, and they had like these reunion tours, and there was all this drama.
Wait, Information what?
Information Society.
I never heard any of this.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, I think they were at their peak a little bit before our time, like maybe in the early 80s or something. But so after that, he moved on to doing games and is best known in the game world for doing the Legacy of Kain series.
Oh, okay.
So,
all right.
that's some big stuff. Also did like Scooby-Doo, but this X-Men game was his second video game credit. All together, so that was pretty cool. He also did.
This was his second game.
Yeah, this was his second game ever. He did Scooby-Doo Mystery on the Mega Drive first, then he did X-Men 2, and he also did Gex Enter the Gecko, like I said, the Legacy of Kain series, and the Death Jr. series on the PSP and DS. So,
He's really stuck around.
Is he still doing stuff?
I think his credits kind of trailed off. I don't think he's.
It's probably when he
super
got
active.
into Information Society and stopped doing the game stuff.
No, he was doing Information Society first, and he left the band.
Oh, I see.
So
I see.
he left in like the 80s, and then so I think he's a bit on the older side. So he's probably retired, enjoying the life of a retired composer.
Yeah.
The Information Society is still around, and they have a new lead singer. He's not part of it, but I guess he does do shows with them every so often. So.
Oh, that's cool. That's cool.
Yeah, and another interesting thing I learned about this game is apparently there was a follow-up game that was supposed to come out that was canceled called X-Women.
What?
Yeah, so I was like, I've never heard of that, and I was like really surprised. I had to like reread it twice.
Wait, when did this come out?
This came out in 1995, so they, I guess, were
Wow.
developing a sequel to this sequel, and it was called X-Woman.
Wow. Progressive thinking in
Yeah.
1995.
Yeah, I guess it got shut down. The people that were pulling the money strings said, no, we're not progressive enough for this.
I mean, the system was already on its way out too, so
Yeah.
I mean that's part of it.
Yeah. That's the end. All right, so ready to move on?
Mm-hmm.
Gene, you are next.
All right, so to piggyback off of playing a lot of Genesis games, I played a lot of bad games growing up, so this one's near and dear to my heart. This is Let's Plow from Skitchin.
Oh, my God.
I think you said that wrong. I think it's Skitchin.
Skitchin!
All right, let's check it out.
That was Let's Plow from Skitchin, composed in 1993, developed and published by Electronic Arts, and composed by Jeff Van Dyke.
Very nice.
Very nice. Skitchin. Dude, this is one of those tracks that's like a poster child for like what people imagine Genesis sound to be, I think. You know, it's like really, really harsh, brash, in your face, more like rock heavy. Obviously, this is very rock inspired. And it's kind of got this grittiness to it. It's not a bad track.
Yeah.
It's just, it has that like in your face attitude
Right.
that I think set the Genesis up kind of as like the badass system. you
Yeah,
know?
I think that attitude is really what defined the Genesis.
Yeah.
And it is kind of, as a kid that had a Genesis, this track does remind me a lot of what I imagine, or what I remember a lot of Sega Genesis music being like. I mean, it's very much like a garage band, which I had a lot of, beat 'em up games. Like I remember Maximum Carnage had a very garage band rock sound to it,
Yeah.
very heavy and grungy. And this track was really cool. It had almost like a jazziness to it with, you didn't really know where it was going to go.
Like a little
and-
shuffle. Yeah.
and like it was like little riffs that were kind of thrown in here, like, they're just like warming up, or like they maybe don't even know where they're going to take their their little song. So I thought it was a really cool track, and I really like the grungy sound that set the Genesis apart. I mean, I have a soft spot for it. But that first track you played showed that it could do stuff that was very bright and happy, very Super Nintendo-esque, I guess, with the fun factor. And this track was just, the total opposite. It was very cool.
What do you think about it? I mean, you picked it, so.
Well, sure. Skitchin actually has a pretty great soundtrack. It's a little bit more on the background side. There's like a pretty like rockin' intro tune, but the rest of the stuff, what's actually really cool about this game is you can pick whichever track you want before you start a race. There's like a little CD player that spins around, and it tells you the titles of these tracks. and then you just pick whichever one you want. I tended to pick this one a lot because it has sort of a slower energy. It's got some really interesting, not really time changes, but like sort of rhythm patterns. And yeah, it does have like a bluesy rock thing sort of in the middle. It doesn't just stay in this very grunge rock thing the entire time. And
yeah, it's got a little shuffle to it, little swing that kind of gives it a little bit more live feeling than just like this straight, 4/4 signature kind of track. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and there's plenty of tracks like that in the game, and I kind of wanted to pick one that was a little bit more adventurous musically. And for those of you that have never played Skitchin, it's who wants to explain this?
Not me. James?
Well, you picked the tracks.
If Road Rash wasn't extreme enough for you, why don't you ride behind vehicles on your rollerblades?
I got to be honest. This game, went old for me real fast.
Oh yeah.
I think I only rented this, and I remember maybe enjoying it for that 3 days, and then I was, returning it to whatever mom and pop video shop was available at the time, and never went back.
Yeah, I mean, as far as a racing beat 'em up type, geared towards punk kids, it does kind of get old. It's not the greatest skill factor, but there was some cool stuff. I mean, hooking up the cars and things like that was kind of neat.
It had the wow factor for sure.
Yeah, but I don't think this is a game that would really get made today, possibly influencing kids to start grabbing onto cars and racing each other. And I could see them right off the bat just nope, we can't do that. Right.
I think all that grunge, that guitar is actually through the DAC. I didn't check, but it sounds to me like it's sampled.
I think so. It's a pretty sparse, I think in terms of channels used, it's not really that dense compared to some of the other games that we've heard and we're going to hear.
What I do know is that Electronic Arts actually had their own driver, and I don't have much information on it, but I know that a lot of their games used that in-house driver. I'm sure it was more sequence based because Western composers were mostly used to doing sequence music, and a lot of their games were done by Western composers. So, fun fact.
I wanted to talk a little bit about Jeff Van Dyke. I hadn't really seen a lot of his music or really looked him up, but he's been pretty active. He's written most of the music for the Total War series. Which is, there's 10 games in it.
It's Rome, Total War.
Yeah.
I know our friend Brunk is really big into Total War.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch of those. He was co-composer on the first and second Need for Speed games.
Wow, that's pretty awesome.
And
wow, yeah, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he's done some interesting stuff lately. I was just listening to his soundtrack for a little indie game called Submerged. It's much more acoustic, piano, very, very laid back. And most recently he did Assault Android Cactus, which just came out 2 years ago, so he's still active.
Wow. It's good he's keeping up with it. And when did this game come out? I want to say 92?
93 for Skitchin, yeah.
Okay. Wow, he's been in it for a long time then.
Yeah.
It's good that he's keeping it up. I wonder, does he, do you know if he works as a freelancer or is...
I think these days he's a freelancer because Electronic Arts, I think, has very few in-house composers anymore. And the stuff that he's working on, I don't think is EA projects anymore.
Okay. Makes sense. All right, so you got anything else?
No.
Moving on?
Great. Yeah.
All right, so the next game. This is actually kind of a well-known game, kind of a unknown well-known game. It's called the Ooze. You ever heard of it?
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, it's not a very well-known game, but it's kind of got a little cult following to it. Anyways, the track I picked is called Plague Factory, and this is both parts 1 and 2. All right, that was Plague Factory from the game The Ooze, composed by Howard Drossin. This came out in 1995. It was developed by Sega Technical Institute and published by Sega.
Very cool track. I liked how in the beginning there's that opening. You're like, okay, like, all right, what's going to happen? Where's this going to go? And then it really takes off, and it kind of was like a rock Phantom of the Opera type feel to it. I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. Like
I kept thinking that, like, you know, Maroon 5 was going to come and be like, this love is... But, yeah. Anyways, no, I thought the track was fun.
Oh, yeah. I wrote Phantom of the Opera meets Red Hot Chili Peppers. The entire time you've got this, like, classic 90s rock bass going on underneath, and you've got, like, harpsichord-style sounds, big chords, very, very, like... I don't know, just like a really interesting combination. I wouldn't have expected that from the Genesis.
Yeah. And it's surprising to me, too, because this actually does use both chips. It uses the SN76489 and the YM2612 in combination, but you don't really hear that PSG so much in the back. It kind of takes a secondary role. Also, this uses the Gems driver. You know, the Gems driver... You know, the problem with Gems isn't that it's a horrible driver. You know, it's the problem is like there's 200 games, about 200 or more games that use this driver, and the tones, the default patches that were included with the Gems driver were pretty crappy. And a lot of composers would be like, this is good enough, and they would use those kind of sample patches, and there was like 105 of them or something like that.
Well, I mean, back in these days, how many compositions do they have to pump out in a week?
Right.
It was ridiculous. So they're like, well, I'm not going to take extra time. Like, I got another job to do.
Yeah, and for some of these guys, I think it was probably the first time, maybe not Howard Drossin, but a lot of these guys, the first time they're using FM seriously and have to write, like, actual music, not just toy around with it.
Right. So in order to get good sound out of Gems, you would have to kind of modify these things. And so... people using the stock sounds that came with it kind of give it this kind of muted, muddle, lo-fi sound, and that's why, you know, Gems is kind of looked at being kind of meh, but, you know, it's really not all that bad. I think, you know, on the show we kind of poo-poo it, and I think we do, because usually the soundtracks that we talk about are not really that great for it.
Right.
But there is some killer stuff like this, and the Ooze has an incredible soundtrack.
Well, and we'd see a lot of soundtracks that would come out on the Genesis, and that game would also have been ported to the SNES, and then we're like, well, the SNES version is way better, and we're like, oh, it's Gems, that's why. But I mean, it's very hard. It's much less common to come across a soundtrack where you're like, oh, wow, Gems, that's really cool. Like, this is a good example of it, where that was a very good track.
Yeah, and there's some other ones too. I think like Comic Zone is like a really good example, you know. But Howard Drossin, he's an American composer that's done both music for video games and also film. In the game world, he's done Sonic Spinball, Sonic & Knuckles, Comic Zone, Die Hard Arcade, Dynamite Cop, Vigilante 8, so I mean he's progressing through the systems, Baldur's Gate, Afro Samurai, and then the PS3 version of Splatterhouse that came out, I was going to say like last year, but that was like 5 years ago, 6 years ago. And he's done a lot of other game titles as well as film stuff. So, you know, I don't have his film stuff in front of me, but like I was looking at the list and there's like 20 different things. He did some stuff, like he did a jingle for a commercial that was in the Super Bowl. And I mean,
that's awesome.
Yeah.
He probably got paid more for that commercial than he did for every game.
Every game combined, yeah. But really cool composer, and used I think his use for the sound in this game is fun. It's like really it's grungy. It sounds like, you know, you hear the game, the title is Ooze, and it just sounds like it's oozing out of like the YM2612, just kind of like seeping onto the ground, staining and like burning acid in your carpet or something. I loved it. It was fun.
Yeah, no, I thought it was a great track. I think it's funny how we both had like Phantom of the Opera rock inspirations. I mean, because there was that classical part that was mixed in there, but you know, the bulk of the track was very, you know, progressive 90s rock, which was really cool.
Have you guys played it?
You know, no. I only discovered it many years later in one of those Sega Genesis collections. I think it was either an unlockable or it was just in there, and it was like, what is this? And it was a really interesting game, but I never really took the time to get the hang of it, because at that point it was like, I don't think I was doing very well at the game. Like, this game probably sucks.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, I mean, it came out way late in the Genesis life cycle, so I think a lot of people might have missed it moving on to other systems. Yeah. The story goes that you're a scientist with an experiment that went wrong, resulting in you turning into a puddle of green ooze. and then you're washed down the sink and must make your way back up to the lab. So you have to complete these little tiny puzzles to get yourself back up and, you know, turn back into a person. It's kind of got this top-down perspective where you move around fighting enemies in this. It kind of looks like Bomberman, like the stage layout, how it's like a top-down kind of thing, and you're moving
or
through
like
this
that,
little labyrinth.
PC Engine Batman.
Yeah, something like that. And then there's different kind of puzzle aspects to it. It's actually not a bad game, but I think being so late in the Genesis life cycle, and then also not really being a powerhouse kind of game. You know what? Like, it didn't. I don't remember seeing much about it ever.
Right. No.
I did find it was on Sega Retro. I was looking through like some old magazines, and I saw an ad that referenced it, and they were showing like, oh, the Ooze and stuff. But like, they were also saying, they were also showing stuff from like, I think 32X already. Like, you know, and so it was like, it was kind of like, you know, not the latest, greatest kind of thing. So I could have been why.
Well, you know, the great thing about retro games is they get older, but they're still around. You can still play them. So.
Yeah, and I didn't actually play this until emulation when I was in like high school or something. So yeah, that's how I played it. Anyways, James, you are next on the music list. What do you got?
Next up, I have a track from a Mega Drive only game. The game is called Verytex, and the track is Act 1. You just heard Act 1, The Void of Space, from Verytex on the Mega Drive, composed by Hitoshi Sakimoto. This was developed by Opera House and published by Asmic Ace Entertainment in 1991.
What a great track. You know, I almost picked a track from Verytex. It wasn't this one, but man, I hadn't listened to this one all the way through. That this is incredible.
Yeah, it was just so big. I couldn't ignore it. I was doing some work when I had bunch of Genesis music just playing on random, and I was just like, it was like, you will not ignore me. I couldn't believe it. This to me sounded like something from a disc-based, something with Redbook Audio or something like that. I was just really blown away by how full and large this track is.
Yeah, those instrument design is just well done. I mean, Sakimoto is just, he's the master.
Yeah, Gauntlet 4, say anything else. So
yeah, no, when I was listening to this, I was like, man, this sounds like some kind of like intro to like a bad Eric Roberts movie of the 80s or something. But like it those soundtracks, sometimes the movie might suck, but like they're so epic and big and just go through this whole story. I mean, it should have just been a music video based on that, but this was just grand. The scope was incredible. It just had this, seeing when I was like listening to the track. So I really liked it.
I loved the various different sections. Like, it starts off this 80s prog rock thing, and the energy just builds and stays really high, and then it kind of breaks down a little bit. Like, the energy is still really high in the melody in the B section, and I just love that sort of C right before the loop, where there's just this really powerful groove that kind of you settle into right before it loops again, and just, you do it all over again.
Yeah.
Yeah,
very cool.
And for me, I think this track, one thing that was really neat about it was that it has the full range of sound. I mean, it's got the really high chimey bell parts, and it goes all the way down to the real kind of grungy, vibrating bass, and it's all like managed so well. It all works together so great. Like, it's not a track that's like, oh, this one is really high sounding and this one's really deep and bassy. It was all of it all together, and I thought it was just handled so well that it was, I was just in love with this track.
I think the reason why Sakimoto is such a master when it comes to Genesis stuff is because he did use his own driver. He had his own driver. It was called like Terpsichorean. I had to look it up because I couldn't remember the name, but Terpsichorean. It was his own driver, and I think when you are in control of the actual chip, and you can utilize every facet of it, you're going to be able to create something really awesome, really dynamic, really rich, and really exploit everything that's good about the 2612.
Mm-hmm.
Totally.
Now, since this is a Mega Drive only, do you guys know much about this game?
I don't.
No.
Well, it's a
now I'm curious.
Yeah, so it's a vertical scrolling shooter. It only has 6 levels. It doesn't sound like that much, but from what I was able to gather, the levels in this game are extremely long. And it has checkpoints in it, but it can have as long as 2 minutes between checkpoints in a single level. So that was like one of the gripes that I saw reviewers give the game, is that it's kind of like an easy to pick up game. Like, the weapon system is very simple. I think it was like 3 weapons. Each weapon has like 3 levels of upgrading.
Okay.
But that it was just, there was like, this is so hard to get from checkpoint to checkpoint. Like, each checkpoint
it's like survival.
Yeah, each checkpoint felt like a whole level. Like, this probably should have been listed as like 30 levels or something.
Yeah. Oh well, I'm still gonna try it out after we record. Yeah.
Well, just for the music alone.
Well,
Very cool.
I'm definitely gonna listen to the soundtrack. I'd never heard of this one, even just poking around. I maybe just missed it, but yeah, it's great.
I don't think it was a very well-known game. Maybe because it was Mega Drive only, but I think even more than that. When did you say this came out?
This came out in 91.
91. Oh, so that's
pretty early.
It was like
kind of midlife cycle kind of thing. So, well.
But for some reason, it never came here. People seem to really like scrolling shooters. I know in Japan, there's like a million more scrolling shooters than came here, but
the other thing is that we only got the scrolling shooters that we got were always kind of geared to be on the easier side. When I say easier, I don't mean they were easy, but compared to some of the stuff that was coming out in Japan, they were far less strenuous, I guess.
Yeah.
So maybe this one just didn't make the cut. Maybe, I don't know.
Maybe it came out and they were like, well, this is probably not for American audiences, since they're just going to complain, and apparently reviewers did complain.
So, yeah. All right. Anything else on Verytex?
No, I think that's about it.
All right. So my next track is from Rocket Knight Adventures. It's Stage 5-2, or possibly named Technocity Type.
Possibly.
I don't know. I've seen that name a few places.
All right, let's take a listen.
That was stage 5-2 from Rocket Knight Adventures, composed by... Actually, there's a lot of names here. Composed by the Konami Sound team, including names like Masanori Ouchi, Aki Hata, Michiru Yamane, Masanori Adachi, and Hiroshi Kobayashi. I dug around. I could not find who wrote this specific track. There's so many names there that it's hard to narrow it down. So, if you guys have a better guess as to who wrote it, I'm all ears. But I just listed everybody.
Yeah, I'd have to dig it up.
Yeah,
I'm not going to do that right now.
Well, I mean, this track has so many different parts. It might have been a collaboration. I mean, it was
Just like
very cool.
It's like 5 tracks in one, man.
Yeah.
This is awesome. Great track. I mean, I know this track very well. This soundtrack very well. And I love this game. I adore it. Wow, but what a change of pace, right? Through like 5 or 6 iterations, this jazzy kind of loungy track, this kind of skips around, it kind of hop, jump, skip, or whatever around to these different moods within the same genre. It's just really incredible.
Yeah, this is such an interesting track. Initially, I mean, I think if you've played Rocket Knight, that opening is probably one of the best examples of starting a game and just starting off on the right foot. It's this great, epic, orchestral sounding kind of regal thing, and you're like, oh, this game's so great. This is a little bit further into the game when it's starting to get a little bit harder, and you're kind of skulking around in these like robotic factories, and it's really kind of hard to focus on the music while you're playing because the game gets so tough. So I just wanted to play it out of context because it's just such a fantastic piece of music.
I think this is one of those games that sounds so good out of context, but actually really, really, the game is identifiable by this music for me, and I think that within context, while you're playing, everything works real well. The world has this kind of bouncy, jazzy kind of atmosphere. Even though levels kind of change it up, and it may not have that same look, it does kind of have the physics and everything together just flow into this really kind of organic, kind of jazz sounding track.
Well, and I think it really goes with the game too. Like there was a lot of cool stuff going on in the game that seemed a little bit different. There was, it still had that 90s mascot, like animal mascot, but then there was some really cool gameplay mechanics to it, and it seemed like the music was a little bit more experimental, and it seemed like that they just had fun and were like, well, we're going to take a risk and do what we want to make, and it turned out to be a really great game, both from the gameplay standpoint and from the music.
Now, so did you play any of the other games in the series?
No, I actually only have played this one.
Okay, Gene?
I've played the others a little bit, but this one actually it's the most fun for me. There's, it's a little bit rough around the edges, but I got most of the way through this game. I think I got to like the second to last level, and I couldn't do it without save states.
Right. I really like Sparkster a lot too. That was one that was Rocket Knight Adventures 2. I think it was great. And the soundtracks, I think, across the board are solid. Yeah. Very cool. This also, just want to bring up, this is a Konami game, and most likely uses the Hyperstone Heist sound driver, the same one that we played in our live episode, the sewer something. What was it? Sewer surfing?
Something like that.
Yeah. And so you can hear the richness in the tones. It's a great driver. Konami nailed it.
Oh yeah, Konami always nails it. I mean, back then with music, like they had some of the best sound teams, they had some of the best soundtracks, and I mean they had some of the best games too.
Yeah. Very true.
Just really quick, want to say that organ sound in there. It almost sounds like you're not listening to a Genesis anymore. It sounds like a real like Hammond organ. I mean, it's such a great patch.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember we were talking about the FM history on the live show, and you say Hammond organ. I'm thinking, man, I wonder if they ever regretted that deal because like they could have been doing the sound chips.
Well, I mean, when games exploded, just think of how much money. Well, I guess, they would have been putting into their. We probably would have never really seen much out of the sound chip.
Right.
It would have been in, keyboards and organs and things like that. But
you never know. Actually, Inverse Phase brought up it could have been Casio. Right. He said that, I think we kind of cut him off there, but he said Casio could have bought it up or something. Who knows? But anyways, very cool track. I think we're ready to move on.
Yeah.
All right. So the next track I got lined up is from a game that I actually hadn't played or hadn't really heard of. These are kind of a dime a dozen, right? It's a tennis game. It's called ATP Tour Championship Tennis, and the track is called Sound Test Number 4. All right, that was sound test number 4 from ATP Tour Championship Tennis, composed by Hikoshi Hashimoto, and this was developed by Sims and published by Sega of America.
It's another cool, jazzy little track.
Yeah.
You know, it's not like a massive track or anything, but
it's like 35 seconds
Yeah.
before the loop. Yeah, it's not very long. I chose this one because, for one, it was new to me, and I'm kind of always on the lookout for something that I've just never heard of. I'll look at like a title of a game and I'll be like, man, I don't think I've ever heard of this or seen it. And sometimes those have surprisingly good soundtracks, or at least 1 or 2 tracks that are really well fledged out. And I thought this was a great example of that, kind of a discovery for me. This was on random, and I was listening. I was like, "Oh man, it's a nice little funky tune." It's a shame that it was only 30 some odd seconds, because I could have used a little bit more. But had like a nice kind of jazzy, kind of funky, kind of fresh feeling to it.
Yeah, it's always exciting to see the type of music that's in sports games, even though there may not be a sport or a game that you're really that interested in, but. I mean, it still boggles my mind to see how many sports games have insanely good music. Yeah,
and going on the sports thing, there's a lot of sports games that I like that I don't actually like the sport.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Like I love playing golf.
Oh, golf games. Yeah.
I'm not a golfer in real life at all.
Yeah, and like basketball too. I'm not a basketball fan, but like there's some really good when I say really good, I mean like NBA Jam. That was my jam.
Ooh, NBA Jam is so good.
Tournament Edition, Super Nintendo, it was excellent. But I think this, another kind of thing. Oh, and tennis is really fun. I like playing tennis. There's some really good. I think Mario Tennis those were all pretty fun if I remember correctly. Any of the Dreamcast tennis games, were amazing. But
there were some amazing arcade tennis games too that were really fun.
Yeah. So, what are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, it had to me like a very classic Sega sound. Like it sounds, like a lot of the Sonic soundtracks have this really funky kind of swung thing. I mean, for a tune so short, I was really liking it. Actually, on that note, I wanted to ask, maybe you would know the answer to this, but the Genesis...
I wouldn't bet on it.
We'll see. The Genesis and FM chips in general tend to use a lot of these swung things. Is that something like why do you think that is compared to like Super Nintendo? Was it just easier to program or what?
That's a really good question. I don't think I have a solid answer for it.
So why don't you swing one?
I have some theories, but
it might be that... I mean, it could be as simple as that the composers that were doing Genesis tracks happen to go that style more.
Yeah.
I mean, it could be something that simple, or it could be, a very complex thing where like FM is a lot easier to do in some kind of swing versus, versus like, sampled bass stuff where, you have to program it into the sample to make it sound a certain way.
Yeah.
But that might be overthinking it and that not even be the case. It's a good point. I mean, that's a great question. James, any thoughts?
Oh, I don't really know much about all this stuff. So I was just like thinking like, I do see a lot of stuff on the Genesis that kind of has that like swingy sound to it. But I mean, you see a lot of stuff where people are already doing it. So then you think this is what the Genesis should sound like. So this is how I should do it. And then you come across other composers that are like, well, I'm going to do whatever I want. And I mean, so I guess we'd have to ask some different composers, but I think that's a pretty good observation there. I didn't pick up on that.
It might be like something with when you make an FM patch, especially like a horn patch or something like that, it has a natural kind of swing in its timbre already. And it just sounds like it flows. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's just because even today, if people are making chiptunes and things with FM synths, they still gravitate towards this kind of swung sound. I don't know exactly. I love it, but I don't know exactly why it tends to be that way.
Well, and there's one thing that I can say is probably a good factor is that FM bass has a very funky tone. I mean, you can make it sound very, very funky and have a lot of play with that kind of slap bass. Versus with a sample, you're kind of confined to a certain set sound, right? It's a little bit harder maybe to manipulate than creating a complete instrument and working with that.
Yeah.
So, good observation. So this actually uses a driver called SMPS Z80, and this is the driver used in Wonder Boy 3, and apparently all of the Sega Net games used the same driver. Okay. And so there's kind of a possibility that is where it originated in the Sega Net games, and they kind of started using it elsewhere. But it's in dozens of Genesis games, and it's a really cool kind of driver. Hikoshi Sakimoto, he composed for a number of game companies, most notably Sega titles under Sims, so this company that developed the game. He did Battletoads, the Genesis arrangements, Line of Fire, and Running Blade for the Sega Master System, Dungeon Master for the Super NES, Cosmic Carnage for the 32X, one of the few 32X games, and Sea Fishing Master, Super Mad Champ, and Oekaki Logic for the Super Famicom. Those games I have not played. I assume the first one is a fishing game, and the other Oekaki Logic is probably some kind of drawing puzzle game, maybe like Pictionary or something. I'm not sure. But pretty much most of the titles he did was during his freelance work. So I think he left working for, maybe it was Sims, in 1990, 1991, and then everything after that, pretty much all of his library, all of the stuff that he's composed was doing as a freelancer. Yeah. So this game, you guys, any interest in a tennis game? I could talk all day about it. I just played it.
I mean, there's only really two kinds of sports games. There's like the more realistic ones and then the really arcadey ones, and I tend to really prefer the arcadey kind of.
This is more arcadey.
Okay.
Well, they're visually more interesting, taking big huge power shots and seeing things shine and explode.
Right. I mean, this kind of goes for it kind of reminds me of like Super Soccer, where it's like it's kind of has an arcadey element to it, but it does follow the rules. It doesn't have like any crazy it's not like Super Dodgeball where you have these like insane like loop-de-loop specials or anything like that. So Sega secured the ATP license, which is, I guess, a professional. I don't know much about tennis. There's probably like a million people like, what are you talking about? You don't know this? But anyways, they secured this license, allowing them to include a ton of players like Pete Sampras and John McEnroe.
Sure.
I think it's McEnroe, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
McEnroe?
Oh, yeah, that's the one that
McEnroe?
gets really mad. He has a
McEnroe?
temper.
What did I say? What did I say? McEnroe?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. That name sounds familiar.
That
Yeah,
just
John
shows
McEnroe,
my yeah. That just shows my
McEnroe
Pretty sure
or
he's-
McEnroe? I don't know what you said.
I think he's pretty famous for his hot temper. So
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go with that.
Yeah.
And they also included a create a player, so you can create your own fictional character to kind of compete in this
That's always
this
fun.
tour. Yeah,
Almost.
which is kind of nice. There's 3 different game modes. There's exhibition, match, exhibition tournament, where the player competes against 32 players in this massive tournament.
That's pretty big.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And then there's the ATP Senior Tour event where the player chooses one of the retired players and competes in an 8-player tournament.
Wow. I wonder if they play like a retired player.
Yeah. But if you create your own player and you play through the tour, you actually can kind of like build their levels up and build their like rankings and stuff. So it's kind of neat. I played it this morning, actually. I mean, it's just kind of like a standard tennis game. There's not really a lot to it.
Right.
It's kind of weird because like when the ball, when you play like a volleyball game, which I like a lot of volleyball games for some reason. When you hit the ball up in the air, the ball like grows.
Yeah.
It gets really big to give you that perspective.
Right.
This does that for tennis.
Oh, that's cool.
Which is cool, but it was a little bit weird because like it didn't feel like I didn't really notice the shadow maybe or something, so it just felt like the ball was growing.
So it didn't really feel like it was getting closer to you. It just felt like it was just randomly growing.
Yeah, it was. That is something I wanted to bring up because it was a little bit awkward. But the game was good. It was all right.
That's cool.
Yeah, I think we're moving on.
All right.
It's your last one?
No, I have 2 more.
Oh, you have 2 more.
I went last of the group. So
Okay.
So my next track is from Aladdin on the Sega Genesis,
Ooh.
and this track is called Arab Rock. You just heard Arab Rock from Aladdin on the Sega Genesis, which was developed by Virgin and published by Sega, composed by Donald Griffin, and Tommy Tallarico was also on this soundtrack. And this came out in 1993.
I love this game. I thought it was great.
I've actually never played the Genesis version. Actually, when I was looking into this, I was confused because this game was ported to the Amiga, DOS, NES, Game Boy, and GameCube, or not GameCube, Game Boy
yeah.
Color, the Game Boy Color. And then I was like, wait a minute, why is the SNES not on here? And then I realized this is a completely different game than the Capcom Super Nintendo game, which actually came out just like a month later than this game. So they came out right around the same time. And I was completely confused. I've only ever played the Super Nintendo version, and it's a completely different game that has a different type of gameplay focus. One is more platforming, and one is a little bit more action-based.
Right. So I actually played the Super Nintendo one when it came out, too. I loved that game. I still remember like the password to get to Genie's level. It was Genie, Jafar, Aladdin, Abu. Just in case you wanted to get there real quick. But I loved the Super Nintendo version, and then we rented the version for the Genesis because I heard it was different. A buddy of mine was like, oh, you got to try out the Genesis version. We rented it, and I thought I was like, wait a minute, this is completely different. It's level design, everything feels different, but the physics feel very much the same.
Right.
Aladdin moves a little bit different, but it was still a blast, and I ended up finding a strong love for this as well.
I'm trying to remember if I played this one, because I think maybe I played the Super Nintendo one as well, but I didn't realize they were different games, actually.
Yeah. I didn't either. And then when I was researching, I saw that Disney, the animators from Disney, actually worked with Virgin to make the sprites and animations for this version of the game. So
really?
The animation is incredible. The character design looks insanely good. I mean, this game was eventually downported to the NES and stuff like that, and it apparently was pretty good. I don't know. I've never played that one or didn't look too much into it since this is a Sega episode, but I was just like, wait a minute, what's going on here? And I was very surprised to see this was a very different game. There's actually a Game Gear port of this game. It's also very different. It's actually more of a like running platformer with like flying levels. So it's either like you're like automatically running or you're on like a flying carpet. So 3 different games, and I was really surprised.
This game, though, going back to the animation, I think that is what drew me in as a kid because it felt like I was playing a cartoon. The like his pants, he's got those big MC Hammer pants, and they kind of sway and stuff. And when he climbs up ladders, it looks like his arms are really like his shoulder bones are flexing. It looks really, really good, and I remember that always being such a cool thing, a cool aspect of the game. And the Super Nintendo version as well. I don't know if Disney did any of the animations for that, but I want to say they did because the animations for the Super NES version were equally impressive.
Right. I didn't look too much into that one, but I did see that the reason why is that Virgin had the license to publish Disney games on Sega, but they didn't have it for NES. Capcom still retained the rights to publish Disney games, so they were like, oh man, like we're gonna make this game, and it came out right around the same time. But it's crazy that
because Capcom did the Super Nintendo one,
right, and it was a great game. I mean, I played it a lot, but I had no idea that the Genesis one was different, and that this Genesis game is like, I think it's the 3rd highest selling Genesis game of all time. It sold over 4 million copies.
Wow.
Which is, I mean, insane. I was like, whoa, like number 3, there's how many Sonic games
you said
are there?
93, 94?
This was 93.
93, okay.
But I mean, how many Sonic games were there, and how many other amazing, Genesis games, and this was number 3. So I mean,
people like the Aladdin.
Disney.
Oh yeah, I was all over that.
I thought I saw that in the theater maybe like 4 times, dude. I love that.
I think I saw it in theater once, but definitely on home video a bunch.
Oh, on home video, yeah. Oh, yeah. I think we rented it, and then we ended up renting it so much it was like rent to own.
But yeah, Donald Griffin, I didn't find a whole lot of stuff that he worked on, but I mean, that track was amazing. He also worked on Cool Spot, apparently Jungle Book, and Destiny, but not the Destiny you guys are thinking about. This was a 1996 Windows game.
Okay.
But very cool stuff. I remember I loved the Cool Spot game on the Genesis.
Oh, me too. Yeah, it was fun.
It's a fun game.
Yeah. I feel like we're gonna have to do an Aladdin episode sometime.
Yeah, I mean, especially since it's 3 different games, three different soundtracks, so it's gonna be.
We can have Gene on, and we can all sit like on my sofa and watch it together with some popcorn and
We'll
cry.
just refer to him as Gene.
Oh, we're gonna definitely have to sing some songs.
Oh, dude, I'm all over that.
As long as the lawyers don't come after us. You know?
Well, I guess when this game did come out on the Game Boy Color and stuff like that, they had to actually rip out some of the music and recompose some of it because they no longer had the rights to use the music straight from the movie. So.
I can show you the world.
We're cutting that.
All right, so ready to move on?
Yeah.
Good?
All right, so this is my last track for the day. This came as a bit of a surprise. I'd never heard of this game, but I've definitely heard of some of these composers. So this last track is from a game called The Hybrid Front. It's Mega Drive only. It only came out in Japan, and the track is called Sakuraba Fight BGM 3.
Stand by for action.
That was Moon Mars Sakurabe Fight BGM 3.
Very awesome. I'd never heard this track. That's so cool. I am in love.
Yeah, it's always great coming across games that didn't come here, so we have less accessibility to them. And then, we've had a couple Mega Drive only tracks on here, and that was a really good one.
Yeah, man. Like the high end is it's a little overbearing at points, but like the rhythm section is so good. It's really choppy, and it has this a groove to it, and the bass is smooth kind of behind that, so it kind of mellows it out. It's almost like you have a very smooth bass, a very choppy rhythm section, and this kind of high end, and the track kind of blends together, and I think it gives this really kind of awesome scope.
Yeah, it's like hard to place if it's like supposed to feel dangerous or like eerie or futuristic. I mean, there's so much going on, and there's such variety in the track that it's like hard to nail down like what I'm feeling when listening to it. I just really like it.
Yeah, good track. So how did you come across this?
So so earlier this morning, I found out that I had made some strange picks for this episode outside of the Genesis theme, so I was scrambling to find something. Like, I found 3, and I was like, I'm happy with these, but I need to find something else that really speaks to me, that's maybe a little bit that I've never heard of, or that's you probably wouldn't find just stumbling on your own. And I found this gigantic, like, 700 file playlist on YouTube of Genesis tracks. I'm like, well, all right, we'll just poke around. Something about the box art stood out to me. It looked a little bit like we were saying earlier, Eon Flux and
Ghost in the
Shell. Yeah. And I was like, I'd never heard of this game. And it's developed and published by Sega. Came out in 1994. And the composers there's 3 listed. I'm going to start with the other 2. They're still heavy hitters. We've got Junko Shiratsu, who wrote music for Sonic Crackers, Outrunners, Knuckles Chaotix. Sachio Ogawa, who wrote music for Space Harrier 3D, Super Thunderblade, and Virtua Fighter 4. But the lion's share definitely goes to Naofumi Hataya, who wrote the music for Golden Axe 2, the Japanese version of Sonic CD, both Nights games, Nights into Dreams and Nights Journey of Dreams, Burning Rangers, a lot of music for Space Channel 5, Sonic Generations, the list goes on and on.
The list goes on.
Yeah.
Sonic Colors, there was a bunch.
Oh, yeah. So, and like, even a lot of these were like the bulk of the soundtrack, so it's very likely that he wrote the track.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Naofumi Hataya for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm just guessing.
Yeah,
But,
it seems likely. There were definitely a lot fewer tracks from the other two composers. It was like, maybe 5 out of like maybe 40 or something like that.
Right. Cool though. I mean, this is what this show is all about to me, is discovery and finding some of this stuff that like I've never heard. I mean, I've combed through Genesis tracks like no other, like I'm pretty sure I have a pretty good handle on it, but it's always great to come across something and be like, wow, I didn't know this.
Well, and it's not like Hataya is not a heavy hitter.
I know, right?
It's so crazy that these massive composers can still have games that squeak by that no one's really listened to.
Yep. Awesome.
Yeah, there was something I was going to say about this one. It's a really odd sort of game. It plays a little bit like Advance Wars or Nectaris, Military Madness. I don't know if the soundtrack really fits. It's great music, but you have...
I wouldn't say that fits at all. That's like totally different. Yeah,
it's really unusual because the aesthetic is like, from what footage I saw, you're kind of in the desert. It's not really futuristic. It looks more 20th century. You got fighter jets, tanks, infantry units, but it's got this weird sort of like very contemporary vibe to the music. I don't know.
Huh. Well, and the box art doesn't seem like it fits at all either.
Yeah.
I was like, man, I expect this to be space fighting, like, or at least in like a dystopian, post-apocalyptic future or something like that, with like partial cyborg people. But
yeah, it's like Advance Wars meets Front Mission for anybody who's played those games.
Right. Now, again, I'd never heard the soundtrack, but I am familiar with the box art only. So that's, I saw it and I was like, oh yeah. And then, that's the thing, I see these games and I'm like, oh yeah, I know that. And then I think to myself, or I listen to the soundtrack, I'm like, wow, I don't know this, so it just squeaked down to the radar. Awesome pick. Very cool. Are we on to, it's my last one.
Yeah.
All right. So kind of riding on the Naofumi Hataya boat, we're going to play a track. This is actually a new track to me as well. It's called the Lose theme, or the Loser theme, from a game called Kiss Shot. All right, that was the Loser theme from Kiss Shot on the Sega Genesis, released in 1992, and this was developed and published by Sega, and I hadn't heard of it, so I was kind of happy. Composed by Naofumi Hataya and Hiroshi Kuboto. I actually did some work on the soundtrack, but not this track. So this was just something that I found on random again. I was like, wow, this is like, I mean, it's short, right? It's like a 30-second loop, but
yeah.
I couldn't not. After I heard it, I was like, man, this has got to go in. It's so smooth, very bluesy, almost kind of like somebody just like lost his girlfriend, but he's going to the bar anyway, and he's going to kind of drink his sorrows away.
I had written, it sounds like a washed up, divorced private eye who's drinking himself to sleep.
Oh, I wrote kicked out of your favorite dive bar, so like the whole journey.
That's like one step further.
This just went on a story arc. I love it. No, but this stood out. It's got a really nice, clean sounding lead. The rhythm, the bass, everything just kind of flows, feels very natural. It doesn't have like a tinny sound to it. It does have much more rich, kind of open, broad, and rounded instrumental tone, I think, and that's why it stood out. It sounded very clean. I liked it.
Yeah, no, this was a great track. I mean, it definitely fit with the idea of losing something. It was just really cool. I mean, it drew up so much great imagery and was really fun to listen to.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was the lead, but it reminded me a lot of some Amiga stuff that you guys have played on the show, like El Mobo. Or
Yeah, I was
some of
just
that.
going to say
Yeah.
some of Frederick Mott's stuff, yeah. Now Fumi Hataya, you kind of already, mentioned him, so won't get into much more, but worked at Sega since 1990 and stuck with him, did all, Golden Axe 2, 3. Didn't mention Space Channel 5.
Oh, he did briefly.
Oh,
yeah,
he did?
yeah.
Did you mention Sega Rally?
I didn't.
Okay, well, then he also did Sega Rally. Sonic Generations, Colors, all that stuff. And I think he did the Olympic Games stuff, the Mario and Sonic Olympic Games soundtracks as well, or worked on those. Hiroshi Kubota, this isn't necessarily his track, but I do want to kind of talk about him because we haven't had him make an appearance on the show before, and since he worked on this, I will at least give him a little bit of credit. He was a sound engineer and composer that also worked for Sega. He did Panic for the Sega CD.
Oh,
Do you
yeah,
remember that
yeah.
game? That wacky, push button
Sort of
kind
like
of game.
a fourth wall breaking kind of game, a little bit. Yeah.
Very weird, very weird. I love that game. So Sarian, the non-Michael Jackson songs in Moonwalker.
You know what?
I was listening to a bunch of Sega stuff yesterday, and so much of the Michael Jackson stuff came on. I was like, I really want to be able to play this to like show people, people that maybe are, not too big into video game music, to be like, guess what? Like let's take this amazing, non-video game track and let's listen to it on the Genesis, and it's still really rad.
I was actually going to say this sounded like it came out of Moonwalker, like get a game over or something.
Yeah. So at the game Kiss Shot, you guys, did I explain what it is?
Never heard of it.
Can
no.
you guess? Take a guess.
A detective?
Kiss Shot.
A sports game?
You're on the right track.
Archery?
No.
Tennis?
No.
Another one? No.
I'm just going to tell you, it's pool.
Okay.
Billiards. Yeah. So it's a simple pool game. It's a lot like Side Pocket. Nothing really special. I played it this morning. Yeah, it's all right. Up to 4 players.
I think
game.
pool games just seem to be best played in real life.
Yeah, that is a game that I'm not a big fan of. Now, like golf, mini golf, super fun, but pool, just I
do
don't know.
like pool in real life though.
Oh, in real life it's fun
yeah.
because it's the environment and you're with your friends, hopefully, and stuff like that. But yeah, video pool has just never caught me. Yeah, so that's about it. I think we're done. You got one more track left.
Yeah.
So that means we're wrapping up the show.
Yeah. So my last track is going to be from The Adventures of Batman and Robin on the Sega Genesis, and the track is called Gotham by Night. You just heard Gotham by Night from The Adventures of Batman and Robin on the Sega Genesis, which came out in 1994, developed by Clockwork Tortoise and published by Sega, composed by Jesper Kite.
This is definitely a Jesper Kite track.
Yeah.
If the length alone didn't convince you, then...
Yeah.
But this is his style. He really likes to iterate on the same theme and then slowly add in extra instruments and little tiny touches. Sometimes you think you hear the same thing looping over and over, but he actually has done a lot more with it.
Right.
And that's his style, but he rocks, man.
Oh, yeah. He's definitely one of my favorite composers. I love how heavy and industrial he is. And with this track, I liked how it was really hard hitting, and then there was parts that were very much more minimal, and then that allowed you to get hit really hard again when the really heavy parts came in.
Yeah.
This is like Hans Zimmer before, he became like the monster composer that he is. And you know what? Jesper Kite now does a lot of scoring for films, like huge orchestral games. I think he was sort of... The way he treats this is like a workstation. He's not treating it like a sound chip. It's like, I can make sound out of this. I'm going to treat it like anything else that I make music on.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like you said, he's done some really big stuff, some more modern things, like he worked on the Hitman series, Borderlands, a Darksiders series. He just recently was announced that he's going to be making music for Battle Chasers Night War.
Oh, wow.
So, which I'm pretty excited about. I helped kickstart that game. I'm really looking forward to it. That's the same people that made Darksiders, but when THQ went under... Vigil Games got absorbed, and then they were like, we don't want to do it this way, so they're going to create their own. They created their own company again called Airship Syndicate, and Kite is going to do some music for that game. So, he also did stuff for like State of Decay, Assassin's Creed. I mean, those are some of the more modern big franchises that he worked on. But we talked about him on our Xerinx episode, which was like episode 4.
3 or 4, yeah, it was up there.
So we did like Subterranea, Scorcher. I think Scorcher had a track that was like 20 minutes long. So, so he's known for having longer tracks, but I could just sit and listen to his music all day.
Oh, yeah. And I think if you listen to any of his soundtracks, you will listen to it all day because it's that long for one track. Is like, I think most of his Genesis stuff was like 8 minutes or something like that. So.
Well, and one thing I really like about Jesper Kite is that over the years, he's been around for a long time, started in the demo scene, Genesis, all that stuff. He's doing stuff for big modern systems, big, huge games. If you listen to his Borderlands stuff, it still has that really heavy industrial, very hard hitting and mechanical sounding, which it's
It's like he transferred the exact same sound. It's like he always did the same sound, and it just is the sound chip that kind of defined what it sounded like a little bit more. But he's had like a common interest in what he likes to compose, and it's maintained. And probably if he had no limitations back then, it would have sounded the same as the stuff we're hearing on like Borderlands, Hitman, and all that stuff.
He definitely has a style. He can do other stuff. I've heard things that are a little bit more symphonic sounding and maybe not as grungy and heavy, but to me, he's one of my favorite composers.
Yeah, when I was listening to this, I think I kind of alluded to that, is that it sounded like he was treating this thing as just a thing that can make sound. He wasn't saying, well, what are the limitations of this chip? What can I compose that'll work to its advantages? No, I'm going to make the music that I'm going to make, and it's going to sound about as good as I can make it sound with what I've got.
Right. Anyways, anything else on Batman and Robin?
The games were interesting because there was the Genesis version, there was a Super Nintendo version that was not made by the same company. So the Genesis version...
Was it different, like the Aladdin thing?
Yeah, it was a completely different story. So Clockwork Tortoise made the Genesis version, and it only had a few bad guys. It had... the main story was you were trying to stop Mr. Freeze, but there was Joker, Two-Face, and Mad Hatter. Why they picked Mad Hatter, I don't know.
Who's Mad Hatter?
He's basically straight out of Alice in Wonderland. He thinks he's the Mad Hatter, but there's so many other good characters they could have picked. But so Konami actually made the Super Nintendo version, and it had music by the Kuke Club, which amazing group of composers. They had a ton of villains. They had Joker, Poison Ivy, Penguin, Catwoman, Two-Face, Scarecrow, Riddler, Clayface, Man-Bat. No Mad Hatter.
Wow, that sounds more like a Batman game.
Yeah, and from what I understand, it had a little bit more of like the episodes. Like each each level was somewhat based on an episode of
See,
the
I
game.
thought the whole game was based on the animated series. No?
It is, but from what I understand with the Super Nintendo version is each level was based loosely on a single episode from the series.
I see.
Whereas the Genesis version had one story that it was trying to convey throughout the whole thing. But Clockwork Tortoise also made a Sega CD version, which was a completely different game. And there was a Game Gear port by another company called Novotrade, which I don't really know much about it, but
That's the Echo the Dolphin company. That's all I
is
know
it?
about
Okay.
them. Yeah, but there was something I was going to say. I do remember Mad Hatter from the Batman animated series. He was definitely in a few of the minor episodes, but it was maybe
Right.
just a budget thing, because it sounds like the other one had like 15 bosses in
Mad
there.
Hatter.
Yeah.
Maybe it worked out better in a video game to use him for something. I don't
Could
know.
be.
yeah. Oh, and he did appear in the Rocksteady games, the Rocksteady Batman. I think
Did he?
Arkham City. I think he appeared in that game. But the one thing that all these different games share in common, other than the title and that they features Batman, is that they all got lackluster reviews. Most of the games
right.
were considered very poor. One of the games, even though it's the adventure of Batman and Robin is not even a playable character. So they were
What?
like they were pretty upset. The reviewers were pretty upset about that. Not that many people want to play as Robin, but they I think it was the Genesis game. I'm not quite sure actually now which one was the one that you could play as Robin, but played the exact same as Batman. So you had the 2-player experience, which was pretty cool.
Wow. All right.
But yeah, they were all considered pretty boring or poor games that had
I remember always trying them out and always being like, meh, and skipping it to something else.
They were all considered very beautiful games, and their music was highly regarded, but the gameplay itself was just
Oh yeah, I mean,
pass.
cartoon beat 'em ups were a dime a dozen. I mean, I played the Tick, Maximum Carnage,
Yeah,
Batman
yeah,
games.
yeah,
I mean, there's so
yeah.
they all play kind of the same. Like they're kind of muddy. They're not super defined. Like the music, that's a whole separate thing. But
The
gameplay,
Saturday morning cartoon games always had that feel to me.
yeah.
Anyways,
Yeah, but that's about it for
good track though.
the episode.
Oh yeah,
track,
a
though.
monster track to end the show on.
All right, so if you want to know more about the show, you can find us online at pixelatedaudio.com for the show notes and the track list that we played today. We can also be found online on Twitter at Pixelated Audio, Discord, and other social media platforms.
Yeah, got quite a few now.
Yep.
And if you guys want to take a few minutes to leave us a comment or feedback, or also rate us on iTunes, we really appreciate that. And that helps other people find the show and hopefully discover something they like just like you.
Yeah. I want to give a shout out actually to Warren O from the United States. He gave us an awesome review on iTunes recently, so thank you very much for that. Also, a big way to support our show is through Patreon. We started Patreon about 6 months ago now, and it's been going very well. A lot of people are showing their support for us, and we ask that if you like the show, if you like what we do, throw a few dollars our way. We don't need money because this is something we do as a passion project, but it does help fund some of the things we need. We're replacing a microphone that just went out, website hosting. It's just all that stuff. If we can get some help funding some of that. But want to give a shout out to some of our newest patrons, Michael Collin, Gabe Swar, and Christopher Andrews. I want to say thank you guys so much. It means a lot to us that the show is important to you and you want to give a little bit back. So thank you very much.
Yeah, and if you're new to the show, make sure to check out our live episode, our very first live show at MAGWest, which this is kind of the a little bit of a follow-up to that, using the same system and same sound chip, stuff like that. We also have a bunch of other stuff like Starfire on the PC-98, Dragon Fighter on the NES, a lot of cool stuff to dig into. This is episode 89, so yeah, quite a backlog.
Yeah, and also want to thank Gene for joining us, trucking out here. It's still pretty warm. I think this is our last hot day of the year, though. So
hopefully.
Yeah, I know. Thank you very much, man.
Yeah, no problem. I've been a big fan of the show since I discovered it actually about a year and a half ago, but I've been enjoying listening to the episodes and contributing any way that I can. Being on the show is a ton of fun.
And we are very excited to start having you more as a regular co-host. So that's, when we can get you on for expansion packs, we'll get you into some of our normal shows and stuff. I think it'll be great.
Yeah, because if you remember, we had Gene on our last expansion pack where we had a PC-only themed expansion pack, and we have some ideas for some other themed expansion packs that we think would be a lot of fun.
Yeah. So thank you guys so much for listening. Should we go out with that kiss shot track?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll see you back in a few weeks for the next episode.
Skitchin!
Skitchin!